Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SSRG and Your View. We are recording this video in February. Just in case we fail to post it by February, you should know that it is Black History Month when we were recording this video. And in commemoration of Black History Month, we decided to discuss what roles social work has to play regarding teaching Black people and Africans about their history. Because if you think about it, a lot of Africans and especially Nigerians who are interested in Black history become interested in Black history after they leave Africa. But what happens to those in Africa? Like even I saw a video where somebody was saying that before you teach your child what the Bible says, you should also teach them their history. And this person was in Accra. He was in one of those dungeons where they put enslaved Africans before shipping them out of Africa. So, and that was the first time he is learning about the activities of white people, white enslavers in Africa. So he was talking about that. So, which means that there is a huge gap in our knowledge with regards to our history. So, my first question is, why do you think that there is this huge gap regarding our history?
The first response to that is that it is because of the dominance of Western curricula in Africa. That's the reason. Because we learn about the West in Nigeria and in other countries, but we do not learn about our own culture. For example, when we studied governments in secondary school in Nigeria, each time that our teacher taught us about colonization, it was always the good that colonialism did to Africa, like introducing Western education, bringing Christianity, bringing about development, and a whole lot of things. So, if care is not even taken, people grow up with the mindset that colonization was a good thing. So, it takes personal effort, it takes exposure for one to understand the whole depth of harm that colonization did. So, that is the main problem because everything you find in secondary schools and even in the universities, they are not so grounded in our culture and in our tradition and in our origin. So, that's a brief response to that.
And I think one other thing would be the normalization of colonial legacies. Just like you have rightly said, over time, we begin to see some of the things that are obviously rooted in colonial practices. We begin to see them as normal. And
We even
I would,
claim it's our culture.
yeah, exactly, we
Exactly.
think it's our culture.
Like the
And
patriarchy in a lot of places was brought
mhm,
by the colonizers, and now we
right,
claim it's our culture. They would say,
right.
as an African man, you have to do this without knowing that in a lot of African society, it was matrilineal and
Right.
matriarchal in design.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, like I recently was following up with this Black scholar advocate, Dr. Joy DeGruy, and she talks about, but this time around is more about African Americans and also the Blacks in diaspora, how some of the things they do stem from colonial minds. And she was talking about children, and like she explained how a mother and a child were in the bank together, and then this black child and black parents, the child will begin to like play around in the bank as is expected for the child at that developmental stage. They will begin to like maybe run around or trying to express themselves. And you find this black mother, not even the black mother, another black person who is in the bank would give the black kid a bombastic side eye, like,
You are
what
not
are you?
controlling your child.
Control yourself.
Yeah.
Now, suppose this with a white parent, with a white kid in the same bank. The white parent will allow this kid to explore themselves. And I witnessed this like personally. I was in a restaurant with someone, and the white parent allowed their kid to play and jump around. And at the end of the day, she came back to me and the person that was sitting. I was like, "Oh, I hope he didn't offend you." I was like, "Well, the deed has been done already. Why are you coming now to explain yourself?" But that's typically historically, that's how some of the things that we do tend to become normalized, and we think that they don't have like colonial tendencies.
Yeah, so there's one thing that I was going to ask, but before then, there's an African proverb that says, if elders refuse to educate children, the village idiots will do the education.
Mhm.
And if you think about it, if Africans refuse to do the job of educating other Africans and educating their children and young people, I mean specifically African social workers and other African elite, then the stories that they would know would be that of white people. And white people always water down the impact of history and African history. In fact, if it's they wash it, they whitewash it, and most of the time they eliminate it. Like
Mhm.
for instance, if you think about ancient Egypt, till now there are some white people who want to eliminate the fact that ancient Egyptians were black
We're
people,
blacks.
right?
Yeah.
So if we don't do that job of telling that story, what people are going to get is the watered and adulterated story, right?
Mhm.
So the question is, how do we tell that story? How do we start educating people on Black history?
I was just going to say the first and simple step is you have to know. You do better when you know better. If you, as a social worker, who is supposed to advocate for the rights and of other people, do not even know your own cultural history, how do you want to educate other people? So you have to know that some of the things you are even doing are stemming from colonial practices yourself. So before you even try to educate others.
So we need to educate
Mm.
ourselves even more.
Yes, we need
Yeah.
to educate ourselves on our history. Like this Dr. Joy Degree that I mentioned,
Mm.
she has traveled to several African countries trying to understand the like colonialism from the motherland, like how it all started. How you mentioned Ghana, how they would transport slaves from Ghana. She tried to invest in those things. So if you just sit somewhere,
You know, Ghana was called Slave Coast before because it was the hub for enslavement of Africans.
right?
The truth is that a lot of Africans have never read anything about enslavement of Africans. Like they
Mhm.
don't know that history. And that is why a white person can come and argue with an African and tell them that Africans also played a huge role in
We're
Yes,
complicit in the
because
right.
Africans do not know their own story.
Even when you read a lot of texts in secondary school, the deepest you could see in a lot of texts is just during the time of slave trade in Africa. You see this kind of thing, and then the
Yes.
other stories will continue. But
Mhm.
nobody goes deep down to talk about what that slave trade in Africa entailed. And I
Yeah.
like what you said, TC, that you can't give what you don't have, right? So social workers have the responsibility to arm themselves with the knowledge of our history and then
Mhm.
transmit it to the student and to the general public.
Mhm.
But that also leads to the question of how do social workers even teach themselves these things in the first place. So I think one way to do that is that we should also think of how we design social work education
Mhm.
in Nigeria. So these things should be in the curricula. How we when we teach, especially now that we are advocating for research based on indigenous knowledge.
Mhm.
So the effort that African researchers are making to decolonize social work research should be incorporated in the curriculum so that people start reading. So structure the teaching of students in a way that exposes them to journal articles, publications, books, book chapters that tell this kind of stories.
Or even with excursions that will
Yes.
take them to those communities where those
Exactly.
things happen.
The two of you make very important points. There was something that happened to me 2 years ago. We were in Bordeaux, France, and they took us to this museum, and that museum had a lot of like images of enslaved Africans that were brought to France. And these images were jarring. In fact, the chains were still in the museums, like the chains that they put on their neck. And like for the first time in my life, I had chills. And I have never been this upset about enslavement of Black people until I saw like this physical object. So I think it's important for us to like even have museums that demonstrate all these things that shows this. If it doesn't have to be museums, like even
Yeah.
in social work departments, they should have evidence that shows people our history. It's not just about reading it in books. They need to see images and pictures to, show them how horrible it is.
Speaking of that, there's something that came to mind. I just want to ask, like there's this narrative, like let bygone be bygones.
No.
Those kind of, I mean, that's one narrative. Myself, when I visited the African American Museum here in the United States, I was pissed. Like that week, I was so angry, like because I saw the marks, everything that was like the beating, everything that was going on. But there are people that will argue that it brings up that resentment. I don't know if that's true or if that has any
Yeah,
basis.
but if it brings resentment, is that such a bad thing? Like if people are angry about what happened, it's like if something went wrong and your problem is that people are angry about something that went wrong and you're not angry about the things that went wrong, it doesn't even make sense. And the argument of let bygone be bygone, think about it. In the US now, white people still hold a lot of privilege, and a lot of them was because of the labor of enslaved Africans, right? If they are still, if you want to let bygone be bygone, then let white people also let go of the
Of
wealth
the
and
property.
privilege that they
I feel,
accumulated.
and in addition to that, I feel like the phrase "let bygone be bygone" is a religious construct.
Yes,
And because it is a religious construct, it goes back to the whole idea that the colonizers used religion as a tool to make us forget everything they did,
yes,
Mm,
which we are not going to do, because letting bygone be bygone in this context means we should let go of our history, which
mm.
is very dangerous.
the thing is that your history is impacting you till now.
Till now.
How can you
Exactly,
let it go?
exactly. There is this adage that if you had a certain past, there is no way you can navigate the future without knowing that past,
Yes,
Mhm.
right? Because if we let bygone be bygone in that sense, we even stand the risk of applauding or worship the colonizers for colonizing us, despite everything they did to us.
yeah.
So there are certain things that I would accept, let bygone be bygone, but this one, let
So
bygone never go anywhere.
yeah, so what I'm hearing, I think, is for social workers, we need to invest in distributive justice.
Yes,
Mm.
yes.
Yeah, and I think that idea makes sense because also I know there are scholars that have talked about how people are talking, oh, let's stop talking about racism, let's stop talking about slavery, but you haven't even made any attempt to mend the injuries, the harm that have been caused by these things. So yeah.
You see the fieldwork orientation we do at the University of Nigeria in the social work department, that first
Mhm.
year orientation,
There
that could
should be
even be
that
an
for
opportunity
this.
that apart from taking people
Mm.
to some hospitals in Enugu or some social agencies, take them to this kind of museums too, because these are very important. Besides, social work sits at the center of this social
Mhm.
justice we are talking about right now. So
Mhm.
this is very important. So we need to know social workers have a role to play, and also we should continue to focus our research on things that not just expose but challenge these things that happen. So when we think of doing research as social workers in Nigeria and social workers in Africa, we should think of how this horrible past of enslavement we had, not just enslavement, but other things, the erosion of our culture and a whole lot of other exploitations that happen. We should think of research that link the past to what we are facing right now. I know there are a lot of research already, but we should
Not
think of
enough.
even more dimensions.
It's not.
Yes, not enough of doing that and also sharing,
Mhm.
continue
Yeah.
to share.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been very enlightening to discuss, and there is still so much to talk about on this topic. And I hope that people would continue having this conversation amongst themselves. Have this conversation in the comment section. Like this video, subscribe, but let this conversation continue because this is a very important conversation. A lot of Africans do not know their history. A lot of
Mm.
Black people do not know their history. And
Mhm.
February,
Yes.
Black History Month, should not be the only time
You know
talk
your
about Black history because we are Black
all the time.
we are Black all year round.
Yeah.
We talk about Black history all year round. Thank you so much for your time.